The dense fog enveloped Enchanted Ridge like a cloak of mystery. Sarah Rivers gazed through the window of her small wooden house as the day dawned lazily. Her eyes, accustomed to seeing through the mist, captured the soft contours of the mountains. That embraced St. Thomas Woods, an almost forgotten village in the American heartland. She prepared a strong coffee, a taste she had inherited from her father, along with the lumberjack trade. Luke Rivers had been a legend in the region, not just for his skill with an axe, but for the deep respect he showed for the forest. "The woods are like a person," he used to say. "They have their moods, their secrets. If you respect them, they protect you. If you challenge them, they react." "Another day, Dad," Sarah murmured to his portrait on the kitchen wall, a yellowed photograph where a grey-bearded man smiled with his eyes. She put on her work clothes, durable canvas pants, a long-sleeved plaid shirt, and well-worn leather boots. On the living room table, she opened her notebook, where she recorded each tree cut, each replanting done, maintaining the balance she had learned was essential. Someone knocked at the door. It was unusual to receive visitors at that hour. "Good. Morning, Sarah," Father Benjamin's deep, warm voice echoed as soon as she opened the door. The priest, with his well-lived 60 years and still firm posture, was one of the most respected figures in the community. His brown eyes, always attentive, seemed to penetrate beyond appearances. "Father Benjamin, what a surprise! Please come in." "Sorry for the early hour, my child, but I need your help," he entered, accepting the cup of coffee Sarah offered him. "The church needs a new altar. The old one is falling apart after the recent rains." Sarah nodded, understanding the importance of the request. The Church of St. Thomas was the spiritual heart of the community, a meeting point that transcended faith and united people. "I need special wood," the priest continued, "something that represents the strength and permanence of faith." "Golden." "Oak," Sarah replied without hesitation. "Strong as iron and capable of lasting generations, I know of some in the upper part of the ridge." The priest smiled, relieved. "I knew I could count on you. Your father would be proud." When Father Benjamin left, Sarah prepared her backpack with methodical care. Water canteen, cornmeal, jerky, sharpened axe, sturdy ropes, and, at her father's insistence before he departed, a small vial with an amber liquid, a remedy prepared by Mother Celeste, the region's healer. "You never know when the ridge will ask for something in return," he used to say. Sarah always considered this a superstition, but she respected the traditions. She began her journey when the sun had barely risen above the horizon. The initial path was familiar, a trail used by generations of lumberjacks and hunters. As she advanced, however, the vegetation became denser, wilder, as if resisting human presence. The silence was the first thing she noticed. Where there would normally be a symphony of birds and insects, only the sound of her own footsteps and breathing filled the air. The wind, when it blew, seemed to whisper incomprehensible words among the leaves. "Strange," she murmured to herself, feeling a shiver run down her spine. The hours passed as she climbed higher and higher up the ridge. The air became thinner, but her body, forged by years of hard work, adapted naturally. That's when she noticed the footprints in the damp ground, large, deep, different from any animal she knew. She crouched down to examine them better. They weren't from a mountain lion or a wolf. They looked like those of a horse, but larger, as if the animal carried an immense weight or was of an unknown species. Something about those marks disturbed her, as if they had been left deliberately for her to find. When she finally spotted the golden oak in the heart of the forest, the sun was already beginning its descent on the horizon. The tree was magnificent, a golden giant among the greens of the woods, its branches extending like arms open to the sky. Sarah approached with reverence, touching the rough trunk with the palm of her hand. Sarah felt something unusual when her hands touched the oaks. Bark! The wood was damp, almost as if the tree was perspiring or silently crying. In her years of experience, she had never felt such a strange connection with a plant. For a moment, she hesitated. A flash of doubt crossed her mind. Would it be right to cut down this golden giant? It's just a tree, she thought, trying to convince herself. I was born for this. It's my craft, my mission. She removed the axe from her backpack and analyzed the terrain around her. She needed to calculate the perfect fall, ensuring the oak would fall in an open area without damaging the surrounding vegetation. It was a practice her father had always emphasized. We take what's necessary with respect, never more than that. She took a deep breath, raised the axe, and delivered the first blow. The sound echoed through the forest like a solitary thunder. At that same instant, the wind changed direction, now blowing stronger, shaking the branches of the trees with unusual violence. Strange, she murmured to herself, feeling a chill. But she continued. Each blow seemed more difficult than the previous one. The axe penetrated the wood with unusual resistance, as if the oak was fighting against her intention. Drops of sweat ran down Sarah's forehead, wetting her shirt. Her arm was beginning to ache. As she worked, her mind wandered to childhood memories. She saw herself small, following her father through the forest, learning the name of each tree, each plant, each animal. He had taught her to read the woods like an open book. Enchanted Ridge, he would say, has stories older than our ancestors. The distant sound of a neigh brought her back to reality. She paused for a moment, looking around. Was someone with a horse nearby? Unlikely at that height of the ridge. Perhaps it was just the wind among the trees creating strange sounds. She continued her work with renewed strength. The wood was beginning to yield, the large tree now swaying slightly with each blow. It was almost ready. Teresa Morgan, the teacher at the only school in St. Thomas Woods, always said that the ridge kept secrets, that there were stories of people who went into the woods and came back different, if they came back at all. Sarah had always thought they were just legends to scare curious children, but now, alone in that place, the stories seemed to take on a different dimension. The oak began to creak, signaling it was about to fall. Sarah took a few steps back, calculating the direction of the fall. Everything was under control, as it had always been in her life as a lumberjack until it wasn't. In an impossible-to-predict instant, the wind roared like an enraged beast. The treetops shook violently, creating a deafening roar. The oak, already compromised by the cuts, began to topple, but not in the direction Sarah had planned. No, she shouted, trying to retreat more quickly. It was too late. The giant tree fell at an unexpected angle, as if pulled by an invisible force. One of the thick branches hit Sarah in the left leg with devastating force. She fell, feeling a searing pain course through her entire body. The impact left her stunned. For a few seconds, everything around her spun in a confused spiral of greens and browns. When her vision finally cleared, the situation revealed itself in all its gravity. Her leg was trapped under a heavy branch, completely immobilizing her. She tried to pull her leg, but each movement only intensified the excruciating pain. She screamed for help, but her voice was swallowed by the vastness of the forest. No one would hear her there. With an accelerated heart, she checked her backpack, which fortunately was within reach. Mother Celeste's medicine vial had broken, the amber liquid now mixing with the damp earth. A feeling of helplessness invaded her. The hours dragged on. The sun began its descent on the horizon, tinging the forest with orange hues. Soon it would be night, and the temperature on the ridge dropped drastically after sunset. Sarah tried to evaluate her options. She couldn't free herself alone. She would need to wait until someone in the village noticed her absence, which could take days. It was then that the feeling returned, the impression of not being alone. At first, it was just a tingling on the back of her neck, a primordial instinct of alert. Then it became certainty when she heard the rustling of nearby leaves, too rhythmic to be just the wind. Something or someone was approaching. In the growing twilight between the trees, Sarah distinguished a movement. A large silhouette slowly emerged from the vegetation. Sarah's heart raced even more when she could finally see clearly. It was a magnificent Mustang with an imposing stature, a gleaming copper-like coat. Its eyes were deep, almost human in their expressiveness. The animal observed her with what seemed to be a mixture of curiosity and understanding. "Where did you come from?" whispered Sarah, forgetting her pain for a moment. The horse remained, motionless, observing Sarah with a disconcerting intensity. There was no saddle, reins, or any mark indicating an owner. Its coat shone with golden reflections, even in the weak evening light, as if emitting its own luminosity. "Do you belong to someone?" asked Sarah, aware of the absurdity of conversing with an animal, but unable to contain the sensation that it might understand her. The Mustang took 2 steps in her direction, its hooves barely making a sound as they touched the leaf-covered ground. It stopped a few meters away, sniffing the air, its deep eyes fixed on the branch pinning Sarah's leg. With deliberate movements, the animal began to dig the soil around the branch with its front hooves. The earth, still damp, yielded easily. Sarah watched, hypnotized, not understanding the purpose of that action, but feeling a thread of hope grow within her. "What are you doing?" she murmured, more to herself than to the horse. After a few minutes, the Mustang stopped digging and positioned itself beside the branch. With a calculated movement, it pushed the trunk with its robust body. The wood oscillated slightly. Encouraged, the animal repeated the movement with more force. Sarah felt the weight on her leg gradually decrease. The pain was still intense, but the pressure was beginning to give way. With a final effort, the horse pushed the branch, which rolled to the side, finally freeing Sarah's leg. A moan escaped her lips. Her leg was swollen, with deep marks and some open wounds, but there didn't seem to be any broken bones. Still, it would be impossible to walk back to the village. The Mustang approached closer, lowering its body beside her in a gesture that seemed deliberately inviting. Sarah understood. "You want me to ride you?" she asked, still incredulous at the whole situation. In response, the animal remained in the same position, its eyes fixed on hers. Gathering her strength, Sarah dragged herself to it, holding on to its mane to pull her painful body. With difficulty, she managed to mount. The horse rose gently, as if conscious of her injury. "Thank you," she whispered, feeling strangely moved. To her surprise, the Mustang did not take the direction of the village. Instead, it followed an almost invisible trail, entering parts of the ridge that Sarah had never explored. She wanted to protest, but something stopped her. A deep intuition told her to trust this mysterious being. Night was falling rapidly now. The full moon began to appear between the clouds, bathing the forest with its silver light. The path they followed seemed to transform under this glow. The trees gained different contours, more ancient and solemn, like guardians of millennial secrets. In St. Thomas Woods, young Michael Sanders, Father Benjamin's assistant and secretly in love with Sarah, looked out the window with concern. She should have returned before nightfall. He knew well the dangers of the ridge. "She knows how to take care of herself," said Father Benjamin, noting his uneasiness. "Sarah knows the woods better than anyone since her father left." "Even so, Father, she never stays out this long, and those clouds, it looks like we'll have a storm." The priest observed the sky, where dark clouds were accumulating on the horizon. There was reason to worry. Enchanted Ridge was treacherous during storms. "If she doesn't return by early morning, we'll organize a search," he decided, placing a comforting hand on the young man's shoulder. Meanwhile, Sarah and the mysterious Mustang continued their journey. Through the unknown forest, she realized they were climbing, reaching increasingly higher points of the ridge. The vegetation changed, becoming more primitive, with trees that seemed to have existed there since the beginning of time. "Where are you taking me?" she asked, once again not expecting a response. The air became thinner and laden with intense aromas, night flowers, humus, a sweet and unknown fragrance that seemed to emanate from the very stones. Sarah felt increasingly lighter, as if the pain in her leg diminished with each step of the horse. It was a strange, almost supernatural sensation. After what seemed like hours, they spotted a faint light between the trees. A small cabin revealed itself, built partially against a rock formation. Smoke rose from an improvised chimney, dancing in the night air. The Mustang stopped in front of the door. Before Sarah could dismount, the door opened, revealing a woman of indefinable age. She was neither old nor young, her brown face marked by lines that spoke of wisdom more than years. Her black hair, with a few silver strands, was tied in a long braid. She wore simple clothes of raw cotton, dyed with colors extracted from the forest itself. It was Mother Celeste, the healer. "Finally, you've arrived," she said, as if she had been expecting Sarah for a long time. "He always knew who to seek." "You knew I was coming?" asked Sarah, confused. "The ridge always returns what is hers," Mother Celeste replied enigmatically, helping her down from the horse. "Come, we need to take care of that leg." The interior of Mother Celeste's cabin was a universe apart. Illuminated by candles and oil lamps, the single-space combined kitchen, living room, and a small consultation area. From the ceiling, beams hung bundles of drying herbs, basil, rosemary, rue, and others Sarah didn't recognize. On rustic shelves, dozens of glass vials contained powders, liquids, and preparations of various colors. A complex aroma filled the environment. Herbs, wood smoke, freshly brewed coffee, and something more. An ancestral fragrance that seemed to come from the very earth beneath the cabin. "Sit here," indicated Mother Celeste, pointing to a wooden chair with a woven straw seat. Sarah obeyed, feeling strangely calm despite the extraordinary circumstances. She watched the healer move with agility through the space, selecting vials, picking fresh herbs from a small pot, lighting a clay stove. "How did you know I was coming?" asked Sarah, breaking the silence. Mother Celeste smiled without diverting her attention from her preparation. "Not many people are chosen by the ridge to be saved," she finally answered. "The Guardian doesn't appear to just anyone." "The Guardian? You're talking about the horse?" The healer nodded, now approaching with a basin of warm water and clean cloths. "He has many names. Guardian, Sentinel, Spirit of the Trails. The elders simply called him the Protector of the Ridge." With gentleness, Mother Celeste began to clean the wound on Sarah's leg. The water in the basin had a slightly amber coloration and a mentholated aroma. "This will sting a little," she warned, before applying a greenish paste to the open wounds. Sarah gritted her teeth, feeling an intense burning sensation that soon gave way to a tingling and finally surprising relief. The pain was visibly diminishing. "I don't understand," said Sarah, watching the healer bandage her leg with raw cotton bandages. "Why would a guardian save precisely a lumberjack?" "I was about to cut down a centuries-old tree." Mother Celeste finished the dressing and sat in front of Sarah, her deep eyes studying the young woman's face, as if looking for something beyond the surface. "Some people are called by the ridge, Sarah. Your father was one of them." The mention of Luke Rivers made Sarah straighten in her chair. "My father? What does he have to do with this?" The healer rose, walking to a dark wooden chest in the corner of the cabin. From inside she removed a cloth-wrapped bundle that she carefully untied, revealing an old leather-bound diary. "Your father left this with me before departing," she said, extending the book to Sarah. "He asked me to keep it until the right moment to deliver it." With trembling hands, Sarah took the diary. She immediately recognized her father's strong, slanted handwriting on the first page. Tears blurred her vision when she read the dedication, "For my daughter Sarah, when the ridge calls you." "He knew," she whispered, running her fingers over the yellowed paper. "Luke understood the ridge better than anyone," replied Mother Celeste, serving 2 cups of an aromatic tea. "He knew that one day you would also be called." Outside, the wind blew with increasing force, making the cabin creak. The Mustang had disappeared, but Sarah felt its presence nearby, like a protective shadow. Meanwhile, in St. Thomas Woods, concern was growing. Michael hadn't been able to sleep, tormented by dark premonitions. At dawn, he gathered with other men from the village, including George Matthews, the merchant who competed with him for Sarah's attention. "She probably just took shelter from the storm somewhere," said George with disdain. "Sarah was always too stubborn for her own good." "Even so, we need to look for her," insisted Michael, preparing his backpack with supplies. "The ridge can be merciless." Father Benjamin joined the group, his normally serene expression now marked by unease. "We can't wait any longer. Divide into groups and follow different trails. And take this." He distributed small vials containing an amber liquid. "It's a preparation from Mother Celeste. They say it keeps away the dangers of the ridge." While the group prepared for the search, Sarah was leafing through her father's diary in the healer's cabin. The pages contained much more than notes about trees and cutting techniques. There were detailed drawings of ancient symbols, maps of unknown trails, and accounts of encounters with inexplicable phenomena on Enchanted Ridge. May 10th, 1998, she read aloud. I found him again today. The Mustang led me to a clearing I had never seen before. There were marks on the stones, symbols that seemed to tell a very ancient story. Sarah stopped reading, feeling a shiver run down her spine. That passage had been written just 3 days before her father's disappearance. She raised her gaze to Mother Celeste, who observed her with a grave expression. What really happened to my father? She asked, her voice choked with emotion. He didn't get lost on the ridge, did he? The healer sighed deeply before answering. Your father made a choice, Sarah, a choice that now you will also need to make. A heavy silence took over the cabin. Outside, the storm intensified. Thunder resounded like ancestral drums. Rain lashed at the thatched roof. Sarah's question hung in the air like a restless spectre. What choice? She insisted, closing the diary on her lap. Mother Celeste rose slowly, walking to the small window. For a moment she observed the darkness outside, illuminated only by occasional lightning. Enchanted Ridge is not just a place, Sarah, began the healer, her voice assuming a more serious tone. It's a living entity, with its own consciousness. The ancients, the first inhabitants of these lands, always knew this. Turning to face Sarah, she continued, For generations, the ridge has chosen its guardians among humans, people who develop a deep connection with it, who learn to listen to its secrets to protect its balance. And my father, he was one of these guardians. Mother Celeste nodded. Luke Rivers seemed like a simple lumberjack in everyone's eyes. But his true work was much more complex. He maintained the balance, ensured that only the right trees were cut at the right times. He replanted following ancient patterns that renewed the ridge's energy. Sarah tried to absorb these revelations. That contradicted everything she believed she knew about her father. And what happened to him? Why did he leave? The healer approached, sitting again in front of Sarah. The ridge was threatened. Powerful men were planning a great devastation. Industrial-scale timber extraction, followed by mining. Your father discovered the plans and tried to stop them through conventional means. He alerted authorities, sought support in the community, but money spoke louder. Mother Celeste paused, her eyes lost in painful memories. It was then that he resorted to the ancient rituals described in the diary, rituals to awaken the deepest protection of the ridge, and it worked, in a way. In a way, repeated Sarah, feeling a knot in her throat. The ridge responded but demanded a price. There is always a price, Sarah. Your father gave himself to the ridge, became part of it forever. Not as we usually depart, but in a different way, deeper. Sarah felt the tears flow freely down her face. Part of her wanted to reject this absurd story, but another part, perhaps the same part that had always felt the presence of the ridge as something alive, recognized the truth in the healer's words. And the Mustang? What is he really? A manifestation of the ridge, a guide for those it chooses. He appears at crucial moments, showing paths, saving lives, or leading the chosen ones to their final destination, as he did with your father. A particularly strong thunder shook the cabin. The flame of the candles flickered, creating dancing shadows on the walls. Why would the ridge save me then? Questioned Sarah, confused. I was about to cut down the centuries-old oak. Because you are your father's daughter, because you carry the same blood, the same connection, and because now the ridge is threatened again. Mother Celeste rose, going to a small carved chest. From it she removed an old map that she spread on the table. 6 months ago, a company called New Frontier Enterprises began buying land around St. Thomas. Officially for ecotourism projects, in reality they are preparing to initiate the largest mineral extraction this region has ever seen. The devastation would be irreparable. Sarah examined the map, recognizing the familiar topography of Enchanted Ridge. Red markings highlighted strategic areas, springs, specific rock formations, ancient clearings that had always had special significance for local communities. "These are the power points of the ridge," explained Mother Celeste. "Places where energy concentrates, where balance is maintained. If they are destroyed, the ridge will lose its ability to regenerate." "And what does this have to do with me?" asked Sarah, although she already suspected the answer. "The ridge brought you here because the time has come to assume your father's legacy, to become the new guardian." The words hung in the air like an inevitable sentence. Sarah felt the weight of responsibility on her shoulders, a weight that her father had silently carried throughout his life. "I don't know if I can do this," she murmured, feeling small before the magnitude of that mission. "No one knows." "At the beginning," responded Mother Celeste with gentleness. "Your father also doubted when his time came, but the ridge doesn't choose by chance, Sarah." A new lightning illuminated the interior of the cabin, and for a fleeting instant, Sarah had the impression of seeing her father's silhouette standing by the door, not as she remembered him in his last days, but strong and serene, as in the best moments of her childhood. The vision lasted only a second, disappearing with the next thunder. "And what should I do?" she finally asked, her determination growing. "First, you must understand, keep reading the diary. Your father left all the necessary instructions." Meanwhile, in the village, the search expedition was facing difficulties. The storm had transformed the trails into dangerous muddy paths, and visibility was almost non-existent. Michael, however, refused to give up. "We need to continue," he insisted, ignoring the rain that soaked his clothes. "Sarah could be injured." George Matthews, the merchant, grabbed his arm forcefully. "Be rational, Sanders. In this storm we'll only get lost ourselves. We'll return at dawn." Reluctantly, Michael agreed to return to the village with the others, but his heart remained on the ridge with Sarah. In Mother Celeste's cabin, Sarah was absorbing the revelations contained in her father's diary. Page after page, she discovered a secret history, the history of generations of ridge guardians, of knowledge passed through centuries, of protection and renewal rituals that maintained the delicate balance between the human world and the forces of nature. In one of the last entries, her father had written, "If you are reading this, my daughter, it means the ridge has chosen you as it chose me. It is not a light burden, but it is also not a burden you will carry alone. The ridge will always be with you, speaking through the winds, the trees, the animals, and I will be too in a way." Silent tears ran down Sarah's face as she absorbed her father's words. "He knew I would read this one day," she said, more to herself than to Mother Celeste. "He prepared everything." The healer nodded. "Luke always knew you had the gift, the same sensitivity to hear the ridge, to feel its needs. He watched you grow, learn the ways of the forest, develop the same deep respect he had for nature." Morning. Arrived with a golden clarity after the storm, Sarah awoke on the small bed improvised by Mother Celeste, her father's diary still open on her chest. She had spent much of the night reading by candlelight, absorbing ancient knowledge, rediscovering her father through his words. Her leg hurt less now. The healer's treatment had taken effect with surprising speed. She sat on the edge of the bed, testing the weight on her injured limb. She still felt pain, but she could walk with the help of a cane. Mother Celeste was already awake, preparing a simple breakfast of coffee, roasted roots, and fresh fruits. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the cabin. "Did you sleep well?" asked the healer, noticing that Sarah was awake. "I dreamed all night," she replied, settling at the small table. "Strange dreams, of places on the ridge I've never seen, with symbols like those my father drew in the diary. The ridge speaks to us through dreams. It's one of the most direct paths to our consciousness." They ate in silence for a few minutes. Sarah felt at a crossroads in her life. The revelations of the previous night had shaken everything she believed she knew about herself, about her father, about her purpose in the world. "What about the church altar?" she suddenly asked, remembering Father Benjamin's request that had led her to the ridge the day before. "The oak! Some trees should not be cut," interrupted Mother Celeste. "The centuries-old oak is one of the natural guardians of the ridge, a point of energy concentration. That's why the tree reacted when you tried to cut it down. Reacted? Are you saying the tree consciously fell in the wrong direction? The ridge protects its vital points, Sarah, one way or another. Finishing her coffee, Sarah stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the day was dawning gloriously, the sky an intense blue, the vegetation washed by the rain shining in 1,000 shades of green. And there he was, the Mustang, grazing peacefully in a small clearing near the cabin. "He never leaves?" she asked, intrigued by the animal's persistence. "He's waiting for your decision," replied Mother Celeste, joining her at the window. "What decision?" "Whether you will accept the ridge's call, whether you will take your place as guardian." The answer hung between them, laden with implications. Sarah knew it wasn't a simple choice. It would mean abandoning the life she knew, assuming responsibilities she barely understood. "I need to return to the village," she finally decided. "There are people worried about me, and I need to think about all this." Mother Celeste nodded, not seeming surprised or disappointed. "That's fair, but take the diary with you, continue reading, and remember, Sarah, the ridge doesn't wait forever." Meanwhile, in St. Thomas Woods, the residents were organizing a new search expedition. Michael was leading one of the groups, his concern now converted into iron determination. "We'll search in the higher areas," he instructed the men accompanying him. Sarah knows these paths well. George Matthews observed the young man with a mixture of irritation and envy. He had always considered Sarah as a prize to be won, the most beautiful and independent woman in the region. Michael's evident concern only confirmed that he had a serious rival. "Perhaps we should check Mother Celeste's cabin," he suggested, more to divert attention from the areas where they had commercial interests than out of genuine concern. "The cabin is very far in the opposite direction from where Sarah went to cut wood," replied Michael, suspicious of the merchant's intentions. "Even so, the old healer knows the ridge like no one else. If Sarah is injured, she may have sought help from her." Father Benjamin, who was supervising the search preparations, approached the two men. "George has a valid point," agreed the priest, "and I'm concerned not just for Sarah, but also for Mother Celeste. With this storm, her cabin might have been damaged." Reluctantly, Michael agreed to lead a small group to the healer's dwelling. Deep down, any possibility of finding Sarah was worth the effort. On the trail back to the village, Sarah advanced, slowly with the help of a staff that Mother Celeste had offered her. The Mustang followed her at a distance of a few meters, like a protective shadow. She had tried to mount him again, but the animal had backed away, as if indicating that this time she needed to make the journey by her own means. "Stubborn," she murmured, glancing at the horse that observed her with its deep, intelligent eyes. The trail they followed was not the same one Sarah had climbed the day before. This one was gentler, winding down the slope with a gradual inclination that spared her injured leg. Once again, it seemed that the ridge was adapting to her needs. As she walked, her mind buzzed with everything she had discovered. Her father's notes revealed an enchanted ridge that few knew, a place of ancient power, where natural forces manifested in ways that modern science could not explain. One specific passage from the diary wouldn't leave her mind. The Guardian walks between two worlds, the world of humans and the world of the ridge. He belongs entirely to neither, but serves as a bridge, as a mediator. It is a lonely destiny, but also one filled with wonders that others will never know. Her father's solitude now made sense, that distant look that sometimes captured his face, as if listening to voices that no one else could hear. The long periods he spent alone in the forest, returning with strange plants and knowledge that he shared only partially. She was so absorbed in these thoughts that she almost didn't notice the approach of human voices. The Mustang suddenly disappeared among the trees, silent as a shadow. Moments later, Michael Sanders appeared around the bend in the trail, followed by George Matthews and two other men from the village. "Sarah!" exclaimed Michael, running in her direction, his face illuminated with relief. "Thank God you're alive!" Michael ran to embrace Sarah, but stopped upon noticing her bandaged leg and the staff she was leaning on. "You're hurt. What happened?" he asked, his face a mask of concern. "An accident with the oak," replied Sarah simply, deciding to omit the supernatural details. "The tree fell in the wrong direction and hit me." George Matthews approached, his smile not reaching his calculating eyes. "How did you manage to survive an entire night on the ridge during that storm?" he questioned, his tone mixing curiosity and suspicion. "Mother Celeste found me," answered Sarah, keeping her gaze steady. "Her cabin isn't far from where I had the accident." It wasn't exactly a lie, she thought, just a simplification that would spare impossible explanations. The old healer, George seemed skeptical. What a convenient coincidence. Michael shot an irritated look at the merchant before turning back to Sarah. "The important thing is that you're okay. We can help you return to the village now." As the group began the descent, George remained strangely close to Sarah, asking questions about exactly where the accident had occurred. His insistence began to arouse suspicion in the young lumberjack. "Why so much interest in the exact location, George?" she finally asked, interrupting the subtle interrogation. The merchant shrugged, forcing a carefree smile. "Just curiosity. And concern, of course. That part of the ridge has sentimental value to me." Michael, who was walking ahead, turned with a suspicious expression. "Since when have you had any sentiment for the ridge, Matthews? As far as I know, you've never set foot on the trails until today." A tense silence fell over the group. George adjusted his hat, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. "We all have our secrets, don't we?" he finally responded, casting a meaningful look at the diary Sarah was carrying. The descent continued in silence. Sarah perceived in the corners of her vision furtive movements among the trees, as if something or someone was accompanying them at a distance. She knew, without needing to check, that it was the Mustang keeping vigil. Upon arriving at St. Thomas Woods, they were received as heroes. News travels fast in small communities, and soon everyone knew that the lost lumberjack had been found. Father Benjamin waited at the entrance to the village, his serene face lighting up upon seeing Sarah. "What a relief, my child. We were all very worried." "Sorry for the trouble, Father," replied Sarah. "Unfortunately, I couldn't bring the oak for the altar." The priest made a gesture dismissing the concern. "The altar can wait. Your safety is more important besides." He lowered his voice, coming closer. "I had a strange dream last night about that specific oak. Perhaps it's better if we seek another tree." Sarah felt a shiver. Even Father Benjamin, a man of traditional faith, seemed sensitive to the ridge's messages. "I completely agree, Father," she replied, exchanging a look of understanding with the religious man. After politely declining several offers of help, Sarah finally managed to retreat to her house. The small wooden structure had never seemed so welcoming, and at the same time so different. It was as if she saw her own life with new eyes after the revelations of the previous night. Michael accompanied her to the door, carrying some supplies that the neighbors had offered. "Are you sure you'll be all right alone?" he asked, reluctant to leave her. "I am, Michael. Thank you for looking for me." For a moment they stood in silence, a silence laden with things unsaid. Sarah had always known of the young man's feelings for her, but had maintained a calculated distance. Now, with the weight of her father's legacy on her shoulders, any possibility of a relationship seemed even more complicated. "Michael," she said finally, "what do you know about New Frontier Enterprises?" The question seemed to surprise him. "The ecotourism company? Not much. They arrived a few months ago buying land around the village." "Why?" "Curiosity," replied Sarah, maintaining a casual tone. "I saw some strange markings in the forest yesterday." After Michael's departure, Sarah could finally relax. She took a long bath, changed the bandages, following Mother Celeste's instructions, and prepared a strong coffee. She then sat at the kitchen table with the diary open in front of her, determined to better understand the legacy that had been entrusted to her. The hours passed as she immersed herself in the secrets of Enchanted Ridge. Her father had meticulously mapped the power points, places where natural energies concentrated, creating a network that sustained the balance of the entire ecosystem. There were detailed descriptions of ancestral rituals to strengthen these points, to heal damaged areas, to communicate with the consciousness of the ridge itself. And there were warnings. about people who tried to exploit these power points throughout the centuries, extracting resources without respecting the natural cycles, about the consequences, devastating droughts, catastrophic landslides, springs that mysteriously dried up. A specific passage caught her attention. There are those who feel the energy of the power points, but do not respect it, who see it only as a resource to be exploited. They are the most dangerous, for they have enough knowledge to cause harm, but not the wisdom to understand the balance. A strong knock on the door interrupted her reading. Quickly closing the diary and hiding it in a drawer, Sarah went to answer. To her surprise, it was George Matthews again. "Sorry for the disturbance, Sarah," said the merchant, his smile not reaching his cold eyes. "I just stopped by to see how you're recovering." "I'm fine, thank you," she replied dryly, blocking the entrance with her body. "Great, great." He tried to peer over her shoulder. "You know, I was thinking about our conversation earlier, that book you were carrying. It looked very interesting." "It was just an old diary of my father's, notes about trees, nothing that would interest a merchant." George's smile disappeared, giving way to a harder, more honest expression. "Don't underestimate my interests, Sarah. They are broader than you imagine." Before she could respond, he came closer, lowering his voice. "Did you know that I am now the local representative of New Frontier Enterprises? We're about to bring real progress to St. Thomas Woods, and people like you with deep knowledge of the ridge would be valuable to us." Sarah's face remained impassive, although her heart had accelerated with George's revelation. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to fit together. "Thank you for the invitation, George, but I'm satisfied with my current work." The merchant narrowed his eyes, abandoning any pretense of cordiality. "Don't be foolish, Sarah. What do you gain living like this, cutting trees one by one, living in a simple cabin?" He gestured toward the modest house. "New Frontier can offer much more. Real money, a future. In exchange for what exactly?" "Information, knowledge about the richest areas of the ridge, special places." Sarah crossed her arms, facing him directly. "Places like the power points?" George's expression transformed instantly, a mixture of surprise and covetousness replacing the false benevolence. "So you know," he murmured, more to himself than to her. Old Luke really did pass the knowledge on. "I think it's time for you to leave, George." He took a step forward, suddenly threatening. "You don't understand what's at stake here, Sarah. Enchanted Ridge contains riches you can't even imagine. Rare minerals precisely concentrated in the so-called power points. Coincidence? I don't think so." "So you know," stated Sarah, feeling a chill down her spine. "I know about the ridge's energy, about the balance, and yet—" "Energy, balance?" George laughed with disdain. "Superstitions to keep simple people away from the ridge's true value. New Frontier has geologists, scientists. They explained the phenomenon. Natural electromagnetic fields that attract certain minerals. Nothing mystical. But you need me to locate these points." "It would be easier, yes. Your father refused to cooperate, but I hope you'll be more pragmatic." The implicit threat in George's words did not go unnoticed. Sarah held the door more firmly, ready to close it. "I'm sorry to disappoint you, but I'm as superstitious as my father. Now, if you'll excuse me." George's face hardened. "Think carefully, Sarah. This will happen with or without your help. The difference is that you could benefit, have a better life. Or you could have problems, like your father had." Sarah felt her blood freeze in her veins. The insinuation was crystal clear. "Are you threatening me?" George backed away, his commercial smile returning to his face like a well-rehearsed mask. "Just presenting options. Think about it. I'll be back tomorrow for an answer." When she finally closed the door, Sarah felt shaky. Mother Celeste's suspicions were correct, and the mention of her father cast a sinister light on his disappearance years ago. Could it be that it hadn't been just a ritual of communion with the ridge? Had her father been forced to depart? Now more than ever she felt the weight of the choice before her. New Frontier's interests weren't just an environmental threat. They were a deliberate profanation of something sacred, a conscious attack on the living heart of Enchanted Ridge. Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock at the window. Startled, Sarah saw Michael's concerned face outside. "I saw George leaving here," he explained when she opened the door. "He looked strange. Is everything okay?" Sarah hesitated. Could she trust Michael? But if she didn't trust anyone, how could she face what was coming? "Come in," she finally decided. "We need to talk." In the following hours, Sarah shared with Michael an edited version of the truth, about New Frontier's plans, about George's veiled threats, about her suspicions regarding her father's disappearance. She omitted only the most mystical elements, the true nature of the PowerPoints, the Mustang and her role as a potential guardian. "We need to alert the village," said Michael when she finished. "Father Benjamin has influence, people will listen to him." "It's not that simple," replied Sarah. "The company has already won many supporters with promises of jobs and prosperity. We need proof." She walked to the window, looking at the darkness of the falling night. Somewhere out there the ridge awaited her decision, and time was running out. "There's a place," she said finally, making her decision. "In the heart of the ridge. If George is right about their plans, they must have already begun preparations there." "How do you know this?" Sarah touched the diary, now safe in her pocket. "My father left maps, records of all the important places on the ridge. If we can find evidence of illegal activity, we can expose New Frontier's true intention." "When do we leave?" asked Michael without hesitation. "At dawn. The climb is difficult, we'll need natural light." After Michael left, Sarah took out the diary and continued her reading. In the last pages, she found what she was looking for: detailed instructions on how to perform the communion ritual with the ridge, how to open herself completely to its energy, officially becoming its guardian. "It is an irreversible choice," her father had written. "Once you accept the call, you belong to the ridge as much as it belongs to you. It is a blessing and a burden, but always remember, you will never be truly alone." She fell asleep with the diary open on her chest, dreaming of wild horses galloping among ancient trees, of her father smiling among the shadows of the forest, of mystical symbols drawn in stone and earth. She woke before dawn with crystalline certainty. She knew what she needed to do. She left silently, darkness still dominating the sleeping village. Her leg hurt less now, allowing her to walk with only a slight limp. Upon reaching the edge of the forest, she stopped. "I know you're there," she said to the darkness. "We need to talk." A soft neigh responded. From the shadow of the trees emerged the majestic Mustang, its coat shining like copper even in the faint starlight. "I need to see all the PowerPoints before I decide," said Sarah, approaching the animal. "Can you take me?" In response, the horse lowered itself slightly, a clear invitation. Sarah mounted with ease, as if she had done this all her life. Without need for reins or commands, the Mustang began its journey, climbing the trail that led to the heart of Enchanted Ridge. As dawn tinged the sky pink and gold, Sarah visited each of the sacred points: crystalline springs where water flowed with impossible purity, clearings where rare flowers grew in perfect circular patterns, rock formations that seemed to have been sculpted by giant hands. At each location, she felt the vibrant energy, the pulsating life that connected all the points in an invisible web of power. And at each location, she also saw disturbing signs: surveyors' markings, recently collected soil samples, small clearings opened for temporary camps. The invasion had already begun. Subtly, methodically, New Frontier was mapping the PowerPoints, preparing for their exploitation. When the sun was already high in the sky, the Mustang took her to the central point, a perfectly circular clearing in the exact center of the ridge, surrounded by 7 centuries-old oaks. It was a place of transcendental beauty, where the air seemed lighter, the colors more vivid, the sounds more melodious. Dismounting from the horse, Sarah walked to the exact center of the clearing. There, a flat stone emerged from the ground like a natural altar. On it, to her horror, she found modern drilling equipment, collected rock samples, and a small improvised camp. A flag with the New Frontier Enterprises logo fluttered on a stake. Her heart tightened. The profanation had already begun. The team of explorers had probably withdrawn during the storm, but would return soon. The Mustang neighed softly, approaching. Its deep eyes gazed at Sarah as if understanding her anguish. "There's no more time, is there?" she asked the animal, which lowered its head as if in confirmation. Sarah removed the diary from her pocket and opened it to the last pages. Her father's instructions for the ritual were clear. She would need total surrender, absolute trust, and the conscious acceptance of her destiny. To become guardian, he had written, one must open completely to the ridge, allow its energy to flow through you, become a channel between the worlds. Taking a deep breath, Sarah sat in the center of the stone in the position indicated in the diary. She closed her eyes, concentrating on her breathing as her father had instructed. She felt the sun's warmth on her face, the gentle wind in her hair, the solidity of the stone beneath her body. Slowly, other senses awakened, senses that had always existed within her, dormant, waiting for this moment. She began to perceive the flow of energy that pulsed beneath her feet, radiating through the soil like invisible veins, connecting each tree, each plant, each living creature of the ridge. Words came to her lips, ancient words she had never learned, but that seemed inscribed in her very essence. A soft, rhythmic chant in a language older than human memory. The Mustang approached, circling the stone in ritual movements. 7 circles, like the 7 oaks that guarded the clearing. With each circle, Sarah's consciousness expanded, gradually, merging with the ridge's own consciousness. It was then that the vision came, not with her physical eyes, but with a newly awakened inner sense. She saw Enchanted Ridge in its totality, a living, pulsating entity. She saw its millennial history, the peoples who venerated it, the guardians who protected it through the centuries. And she saw her father, not as a memory, but as a real presence, woven into the very essence of the ridge. He smiled at her, his eyes overflowing with pride and love. "You are ready," his voice said, not in her ears, but directly in her mind. "The ridge has chosen you. The decision is now yours." Tears streamed down Sarah's face, but she barely felt them. All her life, all her choices, had led to this moment. It was her destiny, her purpose. "I accept," she said aloud, the words echoing through the clearing with a force that transcended physical sound. In the same instant, a wave of energy coursed through her body. It wasn't painful, but intense, like nothing she had ever experienced. It was as if each cell of her being expanded, connecting with the life around her. The wind intensified, making the tops of the oaks dance in a harmonic pattern. The sun seemed to shine more strongly, although clouds were beginning to form on the horizon. When she finally opened her eyes, the world seemed different, more vivid, more connected. She could feel each tree, each animal, each current of water on the ridge as extensions of her own body. She knew, without needing to look, that New Frontier's equipment had disappeared, not by magic, but carried away by the inexplicably strong wind that had swept the clearing during her communion. The Mustang approached, its eyes now recognizable as the same eyes she had seen in her father's vision. It was no coincidence. The animal was a manifestation of the ridge itself, a vehicle for the spirit of those who had become one with it. "Thank you," she whispered, caressing the horse's velvety muzzle. Mounting again on the Mustang, Sarah returned to the village, arriving precisely at the moment when Michael, concerned about her absence, was organizing a search. "Where were you?" he asked, running to meet her. "We agreed to leave at dawn." Sarah dismounted, aware of the astonished looks that the villagers were casting at the majestic Mustang. The animal, which previously hid from others, now remained proudly by her side, visible to all. "I found what I was looking for, Michael," she replied with a serenity she had never possessed before. "And I know exactly what we need to do." In the weeks that followed, an extraordinary transformation occurred in St. Thomas Woods. Under Sarah's leadership, the village united against New Frontier's plans. With the evidence she had gathered, contaminated soil samples, mining projects disguised as ecotourism, confidential documents mysteriously blown by the wind into her hands, they gained the support of environmental authorities and the press. George Matthews disappeared. One night, taking with him only a hastily packed suitcase, rumors suggested he was last seen entering the ridge during a storm, ignoring warnings about dangerous trails. His body was never found. Enchanted Ridge was declared a permanent preservation area, protected by rigorous environmental laws and the tireless vigilance of its new guardian. Under Sarah's guidance, the village transformed into a model of harmonious coexistence with nature, developing sustainable forest management practices, conscious ecotourism, and research on the medicinal properties of native plants. Michael remained by her side, not as the lover he had once hoped to be, but as a loyal friend and right-hand man in her protection work. Over time, he learned to accept that Sarah belonged first to the ridge. He found his own purpose working alongside her, educating visitors and residents about the importance of that unique ecosystem. As for Sarah, she was rarely seen alone. The majestic Mustang accompanied her like a faithful shadow, a presence that local residents quickly accepted as part of the landscape of St. Thomas Woods. At night, she could be seen riding along the ridge trails, a silhouette cut against the moonlight, guarding the secrets and vital force of that sacred place. The Lumberjack had become a guardian. The daughter had followed in her father's footsteps, and Enchanted Ridge continued alive, pulsating, protected, a green heart beating, in sync with the heart of the woman who had learned to listen to its secrets.